The fog clung to the Hudson River like a shroud on that sweltering August morning in 1841, thick and unyielding, muffling the cries of gulls and the distant rumble of ferries chugging toward Manhattan's jagged skyline. Two young boys, rods in hand, cast their lines from the rocky shore near Sybil's cave in Hoboken, their bare feet sinking into the mud as the tide pulled lazily at the water's edge. One reel jerked suddenly. Not a fish, but something heavier, something that bobbed unnaturally against the current, its pale form twisting in the murk. They hauled it closer, hearts pounding, until the thing broke the surface. A woman's body, bloated and grotesque, her once vibrant blue dress sodden and torn, clinging to curves that spoke of youth cut short. Her face, oh God, her face was a ruin swollen beyond recognition, lips parted in a silent scream, dark hair matted like seaweed across bruised cheeks. A thin strip of lace, ripped from her own gown, was knotted cruelly around her slender neck, the mark of a final, desperate struggle etched in purple blooms beneath the skin. This was no drowning victim swept away by a careless current. This was Mary Cecilia Rogers, the beautiful cigar girl of New York, strangled and violated, her lifeless eyes staring up at a sky that offered no answers. Who had lured her across the river on that fateful Sunday, whispering promises of a picnic under the elms? Was it a lover's rage, a botched secret in the shadows, or the brutal hands of strangers in the woods? As the boys stumbled back, retching into the weeds, one question hung heavier than the fog. In a city devouring its own dreams, how does beauty become bait for murder? Picture the scene. Listener, feel the chill of that river water seeping into your bones. Hear the splash as her body yields to the pull, and wonder if Mary screamed that afternoon amid the thunder and the rustling leaves, who plugged their ears and walked away. It was a question that would echo through the penny presses, ignite America's first true media firestorm, and leave a scar on the soul of a young nation still pretending it was innocent. To understand how a simple shopgirl became the ghost haunting 1840s Manhattan, you have to step back into the haze of tobacco smoke and flickering gas lamps that defined the city then. A place where the air tasted of salt from the harbor and ambition from the factories, where horse-drawn omnibuses clattered over cobblestones slick with rain, and the Bowery saloons spilled raucous laughter into streets teeming with immigrants chasing fortunes or fleeing famines. New York in 1841 was a beast awakening, its population swelling past 300,000, crammed into tenements that reeked of unwashed bodies and boiling cabbage, while the elite promenade Broadway in silk top hats and crinolines, pretending the underbelly didn't exist. At the heart of this chaos stood John Anderson's Cigar Emporium on Lower Broadway, a narrow storefront wedge between a printer's shop and a haberdashery, its windows fogged with the breath of loiterers drawn not by Cubans or Virginians, but by the girl behind the counter. Mary Rogers, 20 years old, with raven hair cascading in waves down her back, eyes like polished onyx that could pin a man with a glance, and a figure, symmetrical, as one admirer breathlessly noted, so perfectly formed it, seemed sculpted by some mischievous god. Born in 1820 to a modest family in Lyme, Connecticut, Mary had lost her father young and followed her widowed mother to the city, where Mrs. Rogers scraped by running a boarding house on Reed Street, its halls echoing with the snores of clerks and the clink of teacups at dawn. Mary helped where she could, but by her late teens, her beauty was a currency too potent to ignore. Anderson hired her in early 1840, not just for her quick hands wrapping bundles of leaf, but as a living advertisement. Gentlemen in frock coats would linger for hours, feigning interest in a cheroot, while stealing glances, their wallets forgotten in the spell of her smile. She was lavish with her charms, one patron recalled, yet repelled all undue advances with a modesty that only heightened the allure. Artists sketched her profile. Poets penned odes in the margins of their ledgers. Washington Irving, the great storyteller himself, was said to have paused there, cigar unlit, lost in contemplation. Even Edgar Allan Poe, that brooding raven of Baltimore, crossed the ferry once, drawn by whispers, and later confessed the sight of her haunted my dreams like a melody half-remembered. But beauty in the cigar trade was a double-edged blade. Customers flocked, sales soared, yet Mary's reputation danced on a knife's point. The working girls of Broadway were fair game for leers and propositions, their virtue questioned in every sidelong glance. Mary bore it with grace, her laughter a bell cutting through the haze, but beneath it simmered a restlessness, a yearning for more than the daily tally of smokes sold. By January 1841, that yearning cracked open like a storm cloud. On a bitter winter morning, Mary vanished without a word, leaving her counter empty and the shop abuzz with scandal. 6 days passed, 6 days of frantic searches, wild rumors scrawling across the penny papers like ink blots. Had she eloped with a dashing naval officer, tall and dark-complexioned, spotted whispering to her in the shadows of City Hall Park? Or was it a jilted suitor's revenge, spiriting her away to some godforsaken dockside den? The New York Sun frothed with speculation. The beautiful cigar girl gone, abducted by fiends or fled with a lover. Mothers clutched their daughters closer. Moralists thundered from pulpits about the perils of Broadway's temptations. Then, as abruptly as she'd fled, Mary returned, her cheeks flushed but her story thin. A visit to relatives in the countryside, nothing more. She resigned from Anderson's that very week, retreating to her mother's boarding house, where boarders like the earnest dental student Daniel Payne paid their rent with lingering looks. Payne, 24, with his neat side whiskers and steady hands, seemed the antidote to the city's chaos. A quiet man who carved corks for a living and dreamed of tidy life with Mary at his side. By February, they were engaged, their troth sealed with a simple gold band that caught the lamplight like a promise. Yet whispers persisted. That naval officer, had he truly vanished, or did his shadow still trail her steps? Mrs. Rogers, sharp-eyed and tight-lipped, knew more than she let on, her boarders murmuring of letters burned in the hearth, of Mary's sighs deepening into something like sorrow. Spring unfurled in reluctant blooms, the elms along the Battery greening as Manhattan shook off its winter chill. But for Mary, the air grew heavier, laced with unspoken secrets. She took up sewing at home, her fingers flying over muslin while her mind wandered to the river's edge, where picnics promised escape from the boarding house's stifling routine. Sundays were for church and stolen afternoons, the Hudson a shimmering ribbon calling to those bold enough to cross. On July 28th, that fateful Sunday, the sun blazing like judgment, Mary rose early, her blue muslin dress pressed crisp, a straw bonnet tied with ribbons that fluttered like butterflies. "I'm off to see Aunt Althea in Williamsburg," she told her mother over breakfast, her voice light as bird song, though Mrs. Rogers noted the slight tremor, the way her daughter's eyes darted to the window. A quick embrace, a peck on the cheek, and Mary was gone, her pattens clicking down Reed Street toward the ferry slips, where the air hummed with vendors hawking oysters and the horns of packet boats. But Williamsburg was a lie, a fragile veil over a deeper intent. Witnesses would later swear they saw her, laughing, arm linked with a young man's, boarding the Hoboken ferry, bound not for family, but for the Elysian fields, that bucolic retreat across the water where lovers strolled shaded paths and rowdies gathered in grog shops. The crossing took mere minutes, the river choppy under a sky threatening thunder. But to Mary, it must have felt like stepping into another world. Hoboken's green hills rolling gentle, the cave's mouth yawning dark from the cliffside, wildflowers nodding in the breeze. Who was the man at her side? Descriptions clashed like storm clouds. Tall and swarthy to one stage driver, affable and modest to tavern keeper Frederica Loss, who served them lemonade on her veranda overlooking the woods. A fine pair, Loss would recall, wiping mugs with a rag that smelled of sour mash. They lingered an hour, perhaps two, the heat pressing like a hand on the neck, before wandering hand in hand toward the thickets, where the path narrowed and the trees closed in like conspirators. Then came the scream, or screams, plural, as Loss later swore, piercing the humid air around 4 o'clock, a woman's cry raw with terror. mingled with grunts and the snap of branches. It echoed once, twice, then cut short into a gurgle, swallowed by the rustle of leaves. Loss paused, cloth in hand, but shrugged it off. Her tavern drew rough trade, sailors and sporting men whose frolics often turned rowdy, their amusements spilling into the underbrush with howls that mimicked murder. Thunder rumbled distant, a warning unheeded, as rain began to patter, fat drops drumming the thatch. Back in Manhattan, twilight fell without Mary. Mrs. Rogers paced the parlor, the clock's tick mocking her worry. 8, 9, 10 strikes, each one a nail in the coffin of calm. By midnight, with no knock at the door, panic bloomed. Daniel Payne, roused from his room, scoured the streets till dawn, his lantern swinging shadows that danced like fiends. Monday brought no trace. Tuesday, the same hollow echo. The penny press, ever hungry, pounced. The cigar girl vanished again, abduction or worse. Handbills fluttered from lampposts, Mary's likeness, those soulful eyes, that enigmatic smile, etched in crude woodcuts, passed hand to hand in markets where fishmongers paused mid-haggle. Rewards swelled. $50 from Anderson, 100 from strangers, their coins clinking like guilty secrets. The city buzzed, a hive disturbed. Had the naval officer returned? Or some fresh suitor, promising eternity in a rowboat's sway? Then, on Thursday, August 9th, the Hudson gave up its dead. Those boys by Sybil's cave, David and William, brothers no older than 12, fished for perch when the line snagged. Their shouts drew a crowd. Boatmen, idlers, a coroner named Richard Cook hastening from his office with a black bag rattling tools. They dragged her to shore, the body heavy as lead, water sluicing from folds in her gown. Up close, the horror sharpened. Her gloves still on, kid leather stained muddy, bonnet dangling by ribbons like a noose, dress rent from hem to bodice as if claws had raked it. Cook's examination under a sagging willow was grim theater. Crowds pressing close, murmuring prayers or curses. He noted the thumbprint bruises on her throat, the froth at her lips, the rigid arms crossed as if warding off an unseen blow. Strangulation, he declared, voice cutting the hush, preceded by outrage. The word hung, electric, rape, plain as the welts on her wrist from binding cords. No stone weights, no dragged chains. She'd floated free, perhaps cut loose by conscience or haste. Exhumed days later for formal identification, her form had worsened, skin blackened to leather, eyes sunk in pits, jaws agape with the bloat of putrefaction, worms tracing lazy paths across what was once flawless marble. Mrs. Rogers collapsed at the sight, her wail keening over the grave like a banshee's dirge. Payne, summoned, turned pale but refused to view the remains. "I cannot bear it," he whispered, fleeing to the shadows. The inquest unfolded in a Hoboken tavern, air thick with pipe smoke and ale fumes, witnesses shuffling forward under oath. The stage driver swore to seeing Mary with a dark young man at Bull's Ferry. An anonymous letter, scrawled in haste, claimed she'd boarded a skiff with 6 roughs, sailors from the Baltimore Choppers gang, perhaps, laughing as they rowed to the fields. 2 gentlemen on the beach corroborated, a girl matching her description, Mary amid the brutes, vanishing into the woods without a cry. But Loss's tale clashed. Her lemonade pair, the scream from the hill, ignored amid the storm's roar. Contradictions piled like storm debris. Willing picnic or forced abduction. Lone lover or pack of wolves. Police, a ragtag force of night watchmen and constables more accustomed to drunks than detectives, floundered. Chief Matzel offered immunity to informants. Save the killer, but leads dissolved like mist. A ring traced to Mary turned up on a rowdy named Finnegan, who babbled of a gang confession before recanting. Albany arrests yielded nothing but bruised egos. The press feasted, the herald splashing gore in 10-point type, battered visage, torn garments, the beautiful victim's agony. Crowds thronged the funeral, a procession snaking from the Rogers door to the Presbyterian burying ground, black crepe fluttering like ravens' wings. Vendors hawked broadsides illustrated with Mary's phantom face. Ballads crooned her tragedy to fiddle strains. The Cigar Girl's lament, or the Hudson's cruel wave. It was frenzy incarnate. The birth of yellow journalism, where fact blurred with fiction, editors like James Gordon Bennett penning editorials that bled into novels. This is no mere crime, the Sun thundered, but a mirror to our vices. Women fainted in drawing rooms. Men formed vigilance committees, patrolling the ferries at dusk. Yet amid the spectacle, a deeper rot festered. Mary's prior vanishings dredged up, her loose morals dissected like a corpse on the slab. Was she chaste icon or fallen dove? The city, it seemed, murdered her twice, once in life, once in legend. And as September waned, children scavenging berries near Los's woods unearthed the truth's fragments. A petticoat bloodied and stamped flat, a parasol splintered, a handkerchief embroidered Amar stuffed in a hollow log, the ground churned as if by a devil's dance. Drag marks led to the river, bushes snapped like bones. The spot screamed violation, a thicket where lovers or beasts might converge, hidden from prying eyes but not from the river's indifferent gaze. Payne, haunted, returned there often, his footsteps crunching leaves like accusations. But the case, like the Hudson's tide, pulled away, leaving only questions lapping at the shore. What if the scream Mrs. Loss heard wasn't from Mary at all, but the echo of a secret she'd carried across the water, a secret that turned her picnic into a grave? As autumn leaves turned the Hoboken paths to crimson carpets in 1841, the investigation into the beautiful Cigar Girl's death deepened into a labyrinth of whispers and wild conjecture, each thread unraveling into darker possibilities, pulling the city and a certain melancholy writer deeper into the abyss. Picture the coroner's inquest room again, that cramped Hoboken hall with its low-beamed ceiling pressing down like guilt, the air stale with candle wax and unwashed wool as witnesses filed in, their testimonies clashing like flint on steel. The anonymous letter, that phantom missive dropped at the coroner's door, painted a scene straight from a fever dream. Mary, vivacious in her bonnet, stepping onto a wherry with not one man, but six, burly seamen from the notorious Baltimore choppers, their tattoos snaking like vines up corded arms, eyes gleaming with the feral hunger of the docks. She went willing, laughing even, the writer claimed, into the Elysian fields where the elms hide sins from the sun. The two beach strollers nodded grimly, their pipes puffing clouds that wreathed the room. Yes, a girl like her, Mary amid the wolves, vanishing in a verdure without a backward glance. Gang rape, then brutal, opportunistic, the work of Hoboken's underclass, those rowdies who haunted the taverns with fists like hams and grudges nursed on cheap gin. The press lapped it up, the Herald sketching lurid cartoons of Mary's form overwhelmed in the thicket, her cries drowned by thunder. But hold that image, listener, now twist it. While the lone figure, the tall, dark gentleman Loss, served lemonade too, his manners polished as bootblack, his eyes, she said, holding a shadow. On her deathbed a year later, racked by consumption's cough, Loss recanted the merry picnic, whispering of a different tale. Mary, pale and pleading, confiding over sips that she'd come for relief, a discreet procedure, the kind whispered in back alleys where women sought escape from shame's swell. The man? A young physician, Dr. T.P. Quigley, his hands steady with lancet and probe, leading her not to romance, but to a hidden hollow where herbs and instruments promised discretion. It went wrong. Loss gasped. The bleeding wouldn't stop, the pain twisting Mary's face to a mask of agony, her final pleas muffled by a gag of lace as Quigley, panicked, throttled the evidence, and heaved her into the current. Abortion, then, a botched mercy killing, the cord around her neck not rage, but mercy's cruel cousin. The theory ignited like Greek fire. Pamphlets flew from presses, decrying the midnight butchers like Madame Restel, that infamous English midwife whose brownstone clinic on Greenwich Street was a beacon for desperate souls. her elixirs and probes raking in fortunes amid the era's moral panic. Resdell, with her bold ads in the classifieds, Ladies' Depot for furnishing the means, had already drawn the reformers' ire, and Mary's death became Exhibit A in the crusade. By 1845, her case fueled New York's first anti-abortion statute, lawmakers thundering from Albany benches. The Cigar Girl's blood cries out against this hidden slaughter. Yet flaws riddled the tale. Cook's autopsy found no signs of pregnancy's remnants, only the raw marks of violation and choke. And Quigley? He vanished like smoke. His practice shuttered, leaving only loss's word, fever bright and unprovable. Then there was Payne, poor haunted Daniel, his alibi ironclad. He'd spent the storm-swept Sunday carving corks in a boarding house, rain lashing the panes like accusations. Yet suspicion clung to him like damp wool. Why hadn't he searched harder those first nights? Why refuse the morgue's grim viewing, fleeing as if the dead might rise to accuse? His letters to Mary, unearthed after, burned with possession. You are mine, and no river shall part us. On October 7th, under a harvest moon that silvered the Hudson, he returned to Sybil's cave, the very nook where her body had snagged. Laudanum vial in pocket, he scrawled a note, to the world, here I am on the very spot. May God forgive me for my misspent life. And drank deep, his body discovered at dawn, rigid as hers had been, the river lapping indifferent at his boots. Suicide born of grief, or guilt's final confession? The paper spun it both ways. Payne cast as tragic swain or vengeful groom, his death slamming shut one door only to creak open another. Into this maelstrom stepped Edgar Allan Poe, that spectral genius with eyes like storm clouds and a mind that dissected mysteries as surgeons do flesh. From his perch in Philadelphia, Poe devoured the dispatches, the Sun's breathless bulletins, the Tribune's gory exclusives, his quill itching for a canvas grander than verse. By November 1842, he unveiled The Mystery of Marie Roget in Snowdon's Lady's Companion, transplanting Mary to Paris, rechristening her a perfumer's clerk in a bow to delicacy, the Seine standing in for the Hudson's murky embrace. Through his detective see Auguste Dupin, the cool logician who'd cracked the Rue Morgue. Poe sifted the clippings like clues in a charade, positing first the gang, then the lover, weaving in fresh horrors as they broke. The clothing cache, losses budding whispers of abortion. The body was found, Dupin muses in Poe's prose, bearing marks of violence. Yet the true assassin is the mob's own frenzy. Poe revised mid-serial, installments stretching to February 1843, chasing the real case's twists like a hound the fox. He fingered no culprit outright. Art's ambiguity, he called it, but leaned toward the physician's hand, the disposal a hasty shroud for professional folly. Critics hailed it the first detective tale drawn from life, a bridge from sensation to sleuthing. Yet Poe's own letters betray frustration. I have omitted much mystification, he admitted, the veil never fully pierced. His effort failed not for want of genius, but because the facts themselves were phantoms. Witnesses hedging, police bumbling in an age before fingerprints or forensics, when constables relied on hunch over helix. Modern eyes, listener, might probe deeper. DNA from that embroidered handkerchief, long lost to archives dust, soil samples from the thicket, tracing boots to a suspect's tread, Quigley's ledgers, if they survive the purge. Yet even now, talk screens couldn't unknot the lace at her throat. Was it suicide's noose, self-tied in despair over an unwed burden, or murder's garrote? The 1838 hoax, that forged suicide note penned by a meddling cousin to spike paper sales, hints at a girl who toyed with drama, perhaps courting death as fame. But the autopsy's struggle marks, clenched fists scraped back, scream resistance, not resignation. Weigh the theories, then. The gang's brute calculus, strong in the era's crime waves but frail against the single scream. The abortion's quiet horror, potent in a time when 1 in 5 women sought such shadows, yet undercut by absent fetal traces. Payne's jealous end, poignant but alibi-bound. Each holds a shard of truth, none the full mosaic. The case's core a void where evidence evaporates like river mist. Why then does Mary linger, her ghost adrift in our collective chill? She birthed not just Poe's Pan, but the tabloid beast that devours us still. Think JonBenet or Delphi, headlines howling where facts falter, turning victims to icons, tragedies to traffic. Her death spurred the NYPD's professional birth in 1845, Matzel's ragtag watch evolving into blue-coated guardians. Yet unsolved, she warns of urban perils that persist. The stranger's smile hiding fangs, the secret swelling silent till it bursts. As you sit there, screen aglow in the dark, hear the Hudson's lap against imagined shores, feel the fog's clammy kiss. Who killed the beautiful cigar girl? A lover betrayed, a healer erred, or the city itself, devouring its daughters? The river keeps her counsel, but in the quiet after the credits roll, ask yourself, if Mary crossed that ferry today, would we hear her scream or scroll past? The shadow falls, listener, and the case stays cold, eternally, eerily so.